Well, I'll plunge straight in. David Salkeld and Shamir. I first met David Salkeld at an SIS meeting in London University in 1978. After some years of further SIS meetings, we were together along with our wives on the SIS tour in Egypt in 1984. David and his wife Elizabeth were very friendly towards myself and my wife Ruth, helping to make that memorable trip enjoyable as well as interesting. David impressed me as one who treated any obstacle, however great, as a mere nuisance, further knowledge being the goal. I had no idea to begin with of the causes of his disabilities, which were not allowed to get in the way. David was an intrepid explorer of pyramids and deep tombs alike. There were always interesting questions. In the case of the Great Pyramid, how were these huge blocks of stone put in place such that you couldn't insert a razor blade between them? Modern technology is not thought to be capable of such precision. I don't know where the first idea that Shamir was used for this purpose came from, probably via Velikovsky, and it wasn't until many years later that David and I discussed the origin of the word, what Shamir might have been and what it was capable of. One source was certainly the Legends of the Jews, which David obtained soon after Ralph Amelan left us in 1980. Velikovsky referred to Shamir with or without the definite article. I shall follow David in not using it. The first mention of Shamir in the Legends of the Jews is in a section on the creation of the world. It is said to have been a reptile, or worm, made at twilight on the 6th day, along with 9 other extraordinary things: the rainbow, the hole into which the sons of Korah fell, the well from which Moses drew water, the rod with which Moses did so, manna, the first pair of tongs without which no other instruments could be made, the mouth and character of Balaam's ass, the writing, and the tables of the law. David felt that of these, Moses' rod, the tongs, and Shamir warranted further study, in particular Shamir. It was the size of a barleycorn and could cut the hardest of diamonds. 2 main uses are described: engraving the stones in the high priest's breastplate, and cutting the stones and hard wood for Solomon's temple. In the book of Exodus, chapter 28, there is a description of the precious stones for the breastplate, but no mention of Shamir. In the story in 1 Kings 6 of the building of the temple with quarry-dressed stones, no sound of hammer or pick or any metal tool was to be heard. But again, no mention of Shamir, no direct mention of Shamir. According to the Legends of the Jews, Shamir was to be kept in a woolen cloth in a lead basket filled with barleycorn. The pseudepigraphic Testament of Solomon refers to a green stone needed for building the temple, identical to Shamir. I'm just digress a moment. I'm keeping it clear what's in the Bible, what's in the Legend of the Jews, and other sources. There's so little in the Bible. Okay, to continue. Prompted by an article by Juneman in Kronos, David Salkeld conjectured that the lead basket described above would have been rather a vessel about 4 centimeters long and 3 wide, with a lid, which when opened could allow Shamir to be directed towards the stone requiring cutting. Lawrence Dixon referred David to the Egyptian temple wars in Dendera, where are depicted men holding strange machines, perhaps used to melt the surface of stone blocks. David Salkeld expanded on this idea in an appendix to his yet-to-be-published Shamir Revisited. Where I was able to get involved with David's thought processes and help a little was when he was researching the origin and etymology of the word Shamir. Velikovsky had indicated where the word was to be found in the legends of the Jews and in the Bible, but David wanted to delve further. What puzzled David was that, other than as a place name in Job and Judges, and a personal name in 1 Chronicles, Shamir does not figure in the English versions of the Bible. I was asked to investigate the Hebrew original, which I did with the assistance of my friend, the outstanding Hebrew scholar, Joanna Weinberg. Shamir does appear in the Hebrew Bible, in Isaiah 8 times, and once each in Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Zechariah, as well as the aforementioned books. In Isaiah, Shamir, though singular in Hebrew, is translated as thorns and thistles. Isaiah was probably referring to the object which tradition would have told him was used to inscribe the names of the tribes on the high priest's breastplate. In Jeremiah, Shamir is used as an adjective and translated adamant or diamond, the whole phrase being engraved with an adamant point. This seems similar to Isaiah's use, but even harder. Ezekiel used it figuratively. Kshamir chazak mitzor. Kshamir, adamant. Chazak, harder. Mitzor than flint. So Kshamir chazak mitzor, adamant, harder than flint. Zechariah also. V'libam samu shamir. V'libam, and their hearts, samu, hardened, Shamir, like adamant. So there's Shamir in the Hebrew, but not in the English. So that made it difficult to research. David Salkeld latched onto these translations as well as some stories and references to later Jewish traditions given in the legends of the Jews, thus reinforcing his extension of Velikovsky's theory that Shamir was radioactive and capable of cutting and shaping precious stones without leaving a wharf, as well as hewing and dressing stone building blocks. I believe others as well as Velikovsky had come to this conclusion. I didn't realize at the time that David probably knew this. Anyway, his unique contribution to the study of Shamir was to develop a theory as to how it could have originated. There were already some traditions as to how it was used and what effect it had on the users. David Salkeld suggested it had either come from outer space in a meteorite, or more likely as the result of lightning. Lightning strikes produce an intense plasma bolt, exceeding the power found in linear accelerators, capable of fusing elements into heavier radioactive isotopes. I have to thank Kim Salkeld for this helpful input. David argued that the existence of radio halos from parentless polonium particles in rock provided evidence of this. From a burst of very strong lightning could result a very small amount of Shamir the size of a barleycorn. An isotope of lead would have transmuted via polonium and radon into Shamir, which was another isotope of lead and had a half-life of between 10 and 50 years, so that its radioactive activity would fade in about 3 centuries. In the 1996 SIS review, Philip Clapham published an article on Shamir, which mentions most of the aspects thereof that David Salkeld a year later included in a long article which also refers to one by Velikovsky, obtainable via Google, who suggested that Shamir was radioactive. David went on to explore this idea in depth, speculating as to what sort of substance would have existed at the time of the Exodus and how it might have come into being. This he explored in even greater depth in the SIS Review 2003, going into details of how radioactivity decays from uranium to lead. He also introduces the subject of radio halos. In his unpublished article, Shamir Revisited, which I hope we'll be able to publish one day, because I think quite a large part of it really does exist. David Salkeld researches the possible origin of Shamir as a radioactive isotope, part of the uranium-radium series. He lists 3 series of radioactive isotopes, but suggests that no isotope decaying from uranium would be stable enough to be a candidate for Shamir. Instead, it must have been built up by NBTL, nuclear building by terrestrial lightning. This hypothesis David Salkeld goes into in much detail, repeating some of what was in his paper in the 2003 review. Much is made of work done by R.V. Gentry on radio halos, in which it seems to be shown that lead can transmute into polonium as a result of a sufficiently strong lightning flash. Lightning has been observed during violent eruptions, e.g. Krakatoa and Mount St. Helens. There is a correlation between volcanoes and 210 polonium, or is it referred to as polonium-210, I'm not sure. 210 polonium, anyway. Yet if the latter has decayed from uranium, it leaves no traces of the intermediate radium or radon in volcanoes. David Salkeld believed that this makes a case for 210 polonium having been built up from 206 Pb lead. He gives other supportive evidences. A stumbling block David felt needed to be addressed was the Coulomb barrier between 210, 214 and 218 polonium. After discussing the work of Thomas Gold and Anthony Peratt, inter alia, it is stated that a stroke of lightning with a peak current of 1.25 MA could probably build 222 radon and possibly heavier elements, thus penetrating the Coulomb barrier. I don't pretend to understand any of this. Back to Shamir, supposedly the size of a barleycorn, about 8.5 millimeters long and 3 millimeters wide. Its half-life would have been less than that of radium and radiated much greater energy and much brighter luminescence. The conclusion is that Shamir was 210 Pb, or should that be PO, as opposed to 206 Pb lead, with a half-life of 22.3 years. So I don't know whether that's in any way clear after all that preparation. Shamir is something between polonium and lead, a little above lead, I suppose, and therefore had a half-life of 22.3 years and could have done all these extraordinary things it's credited with. So I'll go on. There is then a mention of another paper dealing with further questions arising from this one. I wonder how much of that paper David Salkeld managed to complete and whether we may be lucky enough to have access to it. I don't think it has a title. The same goes for his unpublished The Formation of Parentless Polonium, which has the date June 9, 2004 attached to it. I'm not sure if David made any connection between Shamir and the Ark of the Covenant. However, there are several tales about the latter in the Bible which could imply that Shamir might have been kept in the Ark. In Leviticus 10, verses 1 and 2, fire leapt out of the ark and consumed Aaron's 2 sons. Occasionally, some of the Kohathite bearers of the ark were killed by sparks. Joshua had the priests carry the ark 7 times around the walls of Jericho until they fell down. After the battle of Ebenezer, the Philistines captured the ark and placed it in the table of Dagon. Next morning, the latter's statue was found fallen to the ground. Then plague assailed the people of Ashdod, Gath, and Ekron. They returned the ark to the Israelites, 70 of whom died. According to one tradition, the rod of Moses, possibly Shamir, was kept in the ark. Another has it that Enoch, equaling Thoth, used it to construct the Great Pyramid at Giza. Now we have come full circle. The more I read and reread what David Salkeld wrote for SIS, the more I realise what a huge loss his death has occasioned. The intellectual, spiritual and emotional breadth of his learning is breathtaking. I understood only a small fraction of it when I was with him, and only now I'm beginning to appreciate part of what he was trying to convey. I must have read all the articles in the SIS Review and Workshop when they appeared, but my memory is poor, unlike his, and only on rereading them recently is the impact what it should have been then, when I had read them first. He was less concerned with the chronology of Egypt, etc., which had been more my interest, but more with the earlier succession of world events and evolution, searching for technological and scientific explanations for the processes involved. Thank you.